All right. So let's talk now about interstate relations. Something sometimes it's called horizontal federalism. Horizontal meaning side to side, all the states are on the same level. Vertical federalism would be the idea of there be a national government above your state governments. Okay. So here's the idea. Article 4 talks about this, is cooperation among the states. And the big part of this is Section 1 of Article 4, it's full faith and credit clause. And it's actually one of the big reasons that the Supreme Court case that's about gay marriage was such a big deal, was the idea of full faith and credit. Because historically, states have recognized legal acts, records, legal proceedings of other states, like marriage licenses. The example I always give is I got married in Colorado, remember, on the mountain. And when I came back to Georgia, I didn't have to get married again. Georgia recognized the marriage license from Colorado. But the problem you ran into with gay marriage is if your state did not allow gay marriage and you went and got married, you were a same-sex couple that got married in another state, what happened when you came back to your state? Whose law was supreme over the other? And so that was a big part of this idea here that kind of led to the Supreme Court's decision. Interstate privileges and immunities. The idea that you have to treat citizens of other states fairly and equally. I can't be punished for a crime in one state just because I'm from another state, if that makes sense. I mean, states have different laws. I can be punished for a law in a state that is not a law in my state. Let's say I live in Colorado where marijuana is legal now. If I go to another state, I can't sit there and use marijuana legally there just because I'm from Colorado. But if you go to Colorado, everyone would be treated equally there. Extradition, that's the idea that if you commit a crime in one state or even in one country, is the idea goes to big to countries, is to that you then have to be sent back to that other state. That responsibility falls to governors. And then interstate compacts, states can only form compacts with the approval of Congress. So states can't make deals amongst each other without congressional approval. Okay. Big cases to talk about here. The big one we've already, is McCulloch versus Maryland. I mentioned it on another slide. That case had two important ideas. The first was it legitimizes implied national powers. The power to create a bank isn't in the Constitution. It's not an express power, a delegated power. But other powers, other delegated powers that Congress has, they felt it was necessary and proper, remember the necessary and proper clause, to need a national bank to carry out those powers, like the power to coin money and things of that nature. So McCulloch versus Maryland said that was okay. So this is another example of an implied power, like the draft. The draft is another example you can always use. It also outlines national supremacy, because the case was really over the fact that the state of Maryland was trying to tax the national bank. And the court ruled that the power to tax involves the power to destroy. You can actually, if you wanted to, if the government wants to get rid of something, they can tax it out of existence. It's one of the reasons that religions, that churches are tax exempt. So the government can't favor one religion over another. And so, it leads to freedom of religion. Okay. And so the court ruled that the state can't tax the national government because the national government is supreme, and so even if the national and state government, their laws conflict, the national government wins. So the national government wins that situation there. So they cannot be. The state tax doesn't apply to that national institution because they could get rid of it, and that's not something the state can do. In other words, nullification is the idea. And though that becomes a big issue around the Civil War, nullification is not a constitutional principle. Okay, so then you have the court's relationship with the states here. Okay, so the national courts and federalism. So remember, the courts can rule over anything except the Constitution. And when I say the court, I mean the Supreme Court, but just the court system in general. The Constitution is the only thing that cannot be overruled by the court. Any state law, any local official, Kim Davis, for example, the Kentucky county clerk who wouldn't provide marriage licenses to same-sex couples. Those are all, any of those actions can be challenged before a federal judge as a violation of the Constitution or national law. That's thanks to the 14th Amendment. which includes states and says that due process does fall to states, and states have to follow the law as well. And so this is judicial review. In other words, judicial review includes state and local laws and officials as well. Preemption is this concept here that national laws take precedence over state or local law. Like, say, an example there, water and air quality standards. A state can have water and air quality standards higher than the national law. California, for example, has that. But a state cannot have water or air quality standards below the national law. Civil rights, you see there. A state can do more in the arena of civil rights. They just can't do less than the national government requires. Same with voting rights. Okay, so preemption. National laws take precedence over state laws. State has to do at least what the national law says. They can do more, but they can't do less. Going back to the Supreme Court and the role of Congress. So one thing that the court has really used historically is the Commerce Clause, the Interstate Commerce Clause, to allow Congress to do pretty much whatever it thought, again, was necessary and proper, those key words there. That started to change. The Commerce Clause is allowed everything, including civil rights. That's the basis for the Civil Rights Act to be allowed to be constitutional, was the Commerce Clause. But the court started to go against that a little bit. There's a constitutional counter-revolution favoring states' rights. That did not succeed, though, in this summer with the case about gay marriage. That was an example of, allowing the national courts to overrule what states were doing. Leads us to this idea of centralist and decentralist. Centralist favoring centralized power at a national level over state and local levels. You see some examples of historical people who are like that. And then decentralists who want power to be spread out to the states. These are people who were like states' rights. You see the people who support there. The Supreme Court currently is 5-4 decentralist, kind of 5-4 conservative, 5-4 decentralist, but there are some swing votes in there. This leads us to this idea of the devolution revolution. Devolution means it's the same idea as decentralization. Okay, it's slowing the growth of the federal government by decentralizing the power, giving more power to the states. So obviously favored by decentralists. An example, Republicans in the 90s did this by giving states more power over welfare, taking that power from the federal government, devolving that power rather than evolving. Okay, so that's the idea here. It's the same idea as decentralization, spreading the power out. Devolution, decentralization, not really different, just different terms for really the same thing. Big thing here, and I think I might run out of time talking about this, so if so, I'll start back up with another one. You got to make sure you understand these grants here, specifically these top two, categorical grants and block grants. Okay, categorical grants are grants that they're given to states. They're based on population, and they are closely monitored. They're very specific in what the state can spend their money on. A categorical grant, think of it categories. You have to spend the money on this. Okay, an example is Medicaid. Block grants are much more flexible. With a block grant, the state can spend the money on it has to spend it on certain things, but they can spend it however they want on certain things. So here's money for welfare, but the state decides how to distribute that money. And then project grants are for specific activities. Please make sure you understand the difference here, and please ask questions if you don't. There's just a little chart to see, a graph to see devolution and what's happening there. You can look at that a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and stop this and finish up in just a moment.